Hey there, it's Christian from 7 Gaming Network, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny Spirit of Rebellion Tactica, and this time we're going to look at a villain force character, and this is a character that I've used quite extensively in a number of builds, and I find him extremely useful and brilliant for his points cost. So we're going to have a look at this chap here. It is the Royal Guard. So the Royal Guard, so we're going to look through his dice, his points value, his ability, his health. We're going to see how he fits in some decks. We're going to see some good cards to play with him, and maybe some ways to counter his ability and play against him. So Royal Guard then. So let's have a look at this dice. A surprisingly good dice. Now, bear in mind this is a character with who only costs 9 points, so he's not expensive. And what we see are 3 damage sides on a 9 points cost character. That's strong, okay? There aren't many of those in those sort of lower values, certainly not from the Awakening set, or that started to change the Spirit of Rebellion. And what we also find is that 2 of those sides are black damage, a 1 and a 2 melee, really strong. And not only that, he's then also got an extra +2 melee side. So in terms of damage, potential damage output, this Royal Guard is very strong. Again, for this points value, having a total of 5 damage on a dice, that's a lot. That's the same amount of damage that Vader has got on, that a number of other big characters have on their dice. So the potential damage output is considerable. Now, he also then rounds it out with 2 shield sides. He becomes a very specific character. He's there to deal out damage or to defend against damage. And what I really love is the ability and how that really works with that character die, because his ability is he's got Guardian. Now, he has a slight drawback, and you cannot play blue abilities on this character. I say slight, that's potentially quite a big drawback. But there's a couple of things to talk about that in a bit with some cards you can play with him. So overall, he's a very focused character. He's there to dish out damage, and I have to say, he is really quite good at doing that, potentially. And he's there to stick shields out and defend, which absolutely makes sense with the Royal Guard. And of course, that Guardian ability is probably the standout thing about him. Now, he has 8 health, which is not massive. At 9 points, it's not terrible, but it's not ideal. What we'd really like to see, of course, is equal health to equal points value for on single die, so he's slightly under that, which is a shame. But we've got to remember he's got 2 shields on his die, and so therefore the chances are you're going to get some shields out of this character at some point. Thereby effectively raising the amount of hit points you're going to have in your team. Now, I think what's really helpful when it comes to talking about Guardian is to look more at the characters that you might pair him with to see the advantage of Guardian. But one thing I will say, of course, is that if you are playing in a meta, whenever you listen to this, if you are playing in a meta that's got some big character dice, things like your Vaders, your Palpatines, those kind of characters, Guardian, I think, in that meta becomes stronger, because you get to control where that damage is going a little more, and of course it's in big spikes, so you can sort of set your Royal Guard up to take that damage and put some shields on and things like that, to sort of sap that damage out of your opponent's control, and I think in terms of characters you can pair with Royal Guard, that makes it really strong. So let's have a look at a couple of cards that you might want to use with the Royal Guard. Now, because his focus is on dealing damage and taking damage, absorbing that damage and diverting it perhaps from other characters, I thought we'd have a look at some of these cards. These are good potential cards to have around. Now, straight away I'm going to point out with Immobilize, you cannot play it on him because it's an ability, okay? So the only way you're going to get that on him is with something like the Sith Holocron. or maybe something like the docking bay upgrade, no, cargo hold, which allows you to transfer upgrades onto other characters. But ultimately, more shields when you're playing with Guardian characters is generally a good thing. Now, of course, if you're playing against a meta with lots of things like Vibro Knife in, that's a bit more difficult because that's unblockable damage. But if you can have something like an Immobilize churning out some shields every turn, that can make a massive difference, because your Guardian ability, of course, remember, allows you to absorb that damage onto your shields. So Immobilize becomes really quite a decent card to have around, even though you're not playing it on your guard necessarily, unless you've got Holocron. I've also put out Armor Plating as well, simply because this is a classic, can take 2 more damage, which is a really nice upgrade to have on something like your Royal Guard, who you're deliberately trying to absorb damage onto. Force Illusion is another good example of a card just like that, that's going to be able to absorb up potentially a big 3 damage hit or a 4 damage hit off a big support or something like that. Okay, so these are the kind of cards that can keep your Royal Guard in place so much longer, and of course what you absolutely want to be doing is maximizing the amount of damage that he's absorbing. So if you can really be very efficient with your shields and getting shields out, or these defensive type cards and abilities, they can make a big difference in keeping him alive. Now, keeping him alive, of course, allows us to chuck out some more damage. Now, I've only picked out 2 cards here, and this is because these are cards with redeploy on. You've got to remember that this is a character who you are trying to get lots of damage onto, generally because he's there to guard another important character in your team. So it absolutely makes sense that if you are going to play upgrades, they need to be redeploys, and actually it's really quite good when you're able to be drawing damage onto a character that is wielding redeploy weapons. I mean, there's something very scary about that for your opponent to deal with, because they don't want that damage to go onto the character that's going to redeploy. I mean, they really don't. So to me, there's almost a double whammy extra effect. If you're able to get shields onto your Royal Guard, and you're able to get one of these on, then you're kind of win-win. If they have unblockable damage, you don't care. You're going to get a nice redeploying weapon out of it. And if they don't, well then you're absorbing it on shields and you're still not taking any damage, and you've still got a character that's able to wield the baton or the lightsaber. So really, really strong. And of course, both of these are really good weapons to have on something like the Royal Guard, because you're going to want to activate, more than likely, your Royal Guard in response and use his Guardian ability, and having that the reroll on your control baton. I mean, it's such a great weapon, and it becomes really strong and scary when it's on your secondary character that you don't really care about. So, talking of don't really care about him, I'm just going to mention this card because it's really fun, I think. I've only ever got to use it in one game, and of course it was crushing. And to be fair, I have used it in a number of games, but it's something I wanted to point out because I really love it. So I made a Veda Royale deck, and that was essentially a Vader with 2 dice Vader, Elite Vader with a Royal Guard, and Price of Failure was in there. For those times when you can really go for it with Vader, if that Royal Guard has taken some damage, and you can play that Price of Failure to finish him off, perhaps. It says spot a blue character and defeat one of your characters to ready a character. I mean, I think everybody knows that if you're playing a character like Vader, then it's all about him. And I think what something like the Royal Guard allows him to do is for us to play cards like the Price of Failure, to get some good value out of your Royal Guard, get him getting some taking some damage and keeping Vader alive for longer, and then when you're quite happy to, bang, the Price of Failure, and in one round you can get huge value out of Vader, or whatever big character you've put with him. So a really, really nice little combo card to have in there. Now, there's 2 cards I've put in here, which I just want to mention as upgrades, and that's because Micajah Training, it's a really good card. It is a really solid card. It's an upgrade ability, and I think there are going to be a lot of decks that Micajah Training is going to be in anyway. And what I was just going to say is, I think that if you're going to use Sith Holocron and get something onto that Royal Guard, you probably want something that's going to allow him to get that damage out. And of course there's the obvious big ones like Mind Probe and so on. But what I do find with Micajah Training is it's an extra little bit of control that I think is often kind of ignored a little bit. This action on it, remove one of the dice showing melee damage, and exhaust this upgrade to remove a dice showing melee damage, I think is, again, if you're having something like that in your deck where you're also playing Royal Guard, you're starting to build in some very nice reusable type control. And actually Micajah Training, again, in the deck isn't terrible. The only way you're going to get it onto your Royal Guard is Sith Holocron, and I don't know if I'd be really all that excited about that sort of play. And actually I've heard a lot of people say, but you can be clever and you can play upgrades onto the Royal Guard with the Sith Holocron. I think if you're playing something like Veda Royal Guard and they go absolutely all out for your Vader, then yes, you may consider then, of course, using the Sith Holocron if for some reason you're not timing your Guardians and Vader's getting really chewed up. Then yeah, you might Sith Holocron and try and get something big and chunky, but generally I think it's going to be a bad idea. What we should be trying to do is get to the situation where your Royal Guard is who dies first. So you don't really want to be Sith Holocroning on him. If you're doing something like Veda Royal Guard, you need to be Sith Holocroning on that Vader. And talking of Vader, so here's some characters that I think are really strong when paired with the Royal Guard. Again, just to quickly reiterate, Darth Vader is about keeping him alive. You're playing with a 21 point character. He pairs perfectly with the Royal Guard at 9 points, and that Royal Guard is there to just divert damage from Vader, and also actually to help maximise the damage output of the deck, because if he rolls the shields, you don't mind. You're quite happy to put those shields onto Vader to help him stay alive. If you roll damage, you probably don't mind and are quite happy to see that damage, because if you're running Veda Royale, then you're about putting out loads of damage. So it really does work very, very well. And Royal Guard keeping Vader alive for an extra round is often all that's necessary. In some ways, when I look at that, I tend to think of seeing that deck as kind of making Vader be 21 points of health. 21 points of health, which is a scary thought when you look at it in those terms. Now I've also played with Asajj. Now of course she can actually you can go full mono and go 2 Royal Guards with a single die Asajj, and do you know what, I don't think that's absolutely terrible, largely because she's of course got this great ability, and what you tend to struggle with Asajj is keeping her alive. Well, 2 Royal Guards are going to keep her alive a long, long time. So a build like Asajj and 2 Royal Guards with lots of things like dice manipulation, lots of turning to blanks, those immobilizers and things like that, can really make a big old difference in keeping Asajj alive and putting lots of control onto the board to make it really difficult for your opponent to do very much. And then your angers become big. You can play anger, that's really nice. So that could be that is a fun build. Now another couple of characters that I'll mention here. I've put FN in the mix, largely because well, again, he's only 10 points. He's a fantastic character, but he's going to be a big target. And one of the things that I will point out is that whilst he's got 11 points of health for 10, and that's amazing, if you've got a Guardian character with him, that's really strong, because they're going to be going after 9s, and if you can keep him alive for longer with that Royal Guardian, that's really strong. And of course FN is more of a melee character than he is a ranged character, and of course that gives you access to stun baton in your deck. So, and that's a brilliant card to use with Royal Guard. So there are definitely some fun potential things you can do there. And again, keeping this theme of keeping the other characters alive and making the most of them. There's quite a big deck called Unkar's Misfits, which has a Royal Guard in it to really abuse not only that Guardian ability in keeping Unkar alive, but also you get to play cards like No Disintegrations, which is a milling card in blue. It gives you access to Feel Your Anger and Force Illusion and some other good cards for just mitigating damage. So yeah, so that's a brief look at the Royal Guard and how he's got, I think, a very nice. He's very nicely designed. He's got a very clear purpose, and I think that makes him a strong and interesting character to include in decks and to build around, because it allows you to really focus your strategy very well. When it comes to playing against him and how you beat him, well, kind of like you do against most Guardian type characters, really, you end up having to make this decision fairly early on about, do I go for him and get rid of him first, or do I have to just acknowledge that I might need to put out more damage to kill my main target, knowing that this guardianing is going to be happening. You know your deck, you know how much damage you can put out, and that's a decision that you can make in the moment on that one. But one of the things that I will say, of course, is if you are playing a deck that has action cheating, well, that's a big advantage over a Guardian character. If you're able to fast hand your character, if you're able to activate, if you've got Ray, if you've got 4 speeds that can go off, if you can get your damage sides resolved, that's of course going to completely overcome that Guardian ability. And of course I would also say, be aware that generally a player using a Guardian is going to try and shield up that character, and so if you have got some shield hate, whether that's in the form of removing shields, you're playing something like Intimidate, or if you're using the unblockable type damage sources such as Vibro Knife, then that's going to stand you in good stead against a Guardian character, because, well, they're going to end up really only getting the 8 points of health out of their Royal Guard rather than artificially inflating it with sticking shields on there. So, fun character, great character, love to build around him, and one of my most enjoyable decks that I ever played with was my Veda Royale, and using him alongside Vader. A great character in a really fun deck. Anyway, that's the Royal Guard. So as ever, if you think I've missed anything out really obvious and really important, please do stick it in the comments. It's meant to be a resource for all of our Star Wars Destiny community. And if you want to get in touch with me, my name is Peace Lord. You can get in touch with me in Knights of Ren Discord channel, and I've also, of course, got the Patreon, where there's all sorts of chat and discussion about this kind of thing going on in our Discord channel on that as well. Anyway guys, until next time, keep enjoying Destiny.